All right, hit and record. Mikael, thank you for coming on and doing this. Much appreciated, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
Absolutely. So, a couple of things I want to talk about. Obviously, the story of Unsplash, and specifically a couple of things that we've talked about in our relationship over the past 6 months or so. And one of the things that really inspired this conversation was where I was hoping to get the iPad. I'm actually going to pull up a screen share instead. Is this idea of finding an inflection point. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So I think we've had this very conversation where you tend to view, especially other people's businesses, through the lens of they woke up one day, they had an idea, and now they're 2 years later they're in at the top of their market and serving every possible use case and customer out there. But your story in building Unsplash has a lot of the same, stumbling blocks that a lot of us have stumbled into in our way to finding product market fit or whatever the metric is we're measuring the success of the project by. And one of the most impressive things, I think, to frame up this discussion before I ask you to go through the story of getting there is Unsplash is now bigger than Shutterstock, Adobe Stock, and Getty Images combined. Is that correct?
Correct.
And for everybody that doesn't use Unsplash, I'm sure the majority of people on this call know what it is or are users of it, but is it now the largest repository of free images on the internet?
It's the largest license-free, high-resolution visuals asset platform.
So just an incredible resource for creatives. I know it got me out of a bind hundreds of times in my career. Every single pitch deck and ad campaign I ever worked on used Unsplash in some way, shape, or form. So I got to thank you for that, first and foremost. But such an incredible story. And as I was reflecting on even doing this meeting, I was like, man, it's crazy that 5 years ago I was sitting at a computer and just pulling images off Unsplash, and then after a couple of years of sort of stumbling around in public, managed to make your acquaintance. So I would love for you to walk us through this process and where you started and how you ended up at Unsplash and where it is today.
Yeah, of course. And I think what's really interesting, and I'm just reflecting on this, what you drew here, each one of these bar graphs is a year. It's not a month, right? Like sometimes you see these graphs or it's a day and then someone going over the month. Each one of these is a year. So you can see sort of that first 4 or 5 years. That's 4 or 5 years of pain of trying to figure out something that can work. And really, it started back. I graduated university in 2008. I'm from the US. I'm up in Montreal now. I met my now wife that summer. She's from Montreal. So that's how I ended up here. Took a one-way bus to come visit her. Didn't have any money. My dad had to co-sign. I was so poor, my dad had to co-sign on a credit card. The bank won't give me a credit card. Right. Here's a $1,500 credit card limit that your dad is vouching up for you for. And I figured that was kind of enough to get me to find something in a couple months. Started working in the internet. So up here, I didn't know how important it was to be able to speak French. So I couldn't find a job. Ended up working at a design agency because they were dealing with US clients. And that was actually my first job. So this is 2008, 2009, started to see all these problems around just getting creative work done. And I think people have maybe had this experience when they had their first job in a company, why is everything so hard? It's everything's so hard to get done.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of work getting done. There's a lot of paper moving and conversations, but nothing's happening.
Right.
And at the same time, that's just kind of when I was really introduced to the internet and the power of that. And I'd be sitting next to developers who would write a line of code, and it seems like an obvious thing now, but when you write a piece of code and you hit publish, it's seen by everybody. And that just kind of blew my mind, that one line that was sitting in their terminal and they hit, publish, that it would just go to everybody in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept falling in love with that, meeting more and more developers, designers, thinking of ideas. There happened to be an accelerator program, which is kind of like Y Combinator, which was like really, catching a hold in the US at the time. There was one that was started here in Montreal. I looked at that as like, in an agency, you're always building someone else's ideas.
Right.
And for the first time, it's like I didn't even know this kind of thing existed. Someone's going to give you money to build your idea. It's like, that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So applied to that with an idea. It wasn't even a company. They gave you 25K for 6%. I thought, this is an amazing deal. And yeah, we got in and went through like a whole bunch of ideas in the 3-month program. So usually all the companies that are coming in, they have a company. We're coming in with like, this is the team, and we're going to try to figure out a company in 3 months.
All right.
And hopefully raise enough money to continue. And yeah, so we went through 3-4 different ideas. We ended on something kind of because we had to. You only had 3 weeks left at the end before you go and pitch to basically all the investors of Canada to hopefully close a deal, kind of like Shark Tank-ish. And the investors who ran the program, they ended up investing in us because I think they saw that iteration that we had, that we didn't quite have something yet, but they saw that willingness to learn and try to figure things out and the scrappiness. So we ended up raising 500K. That was 2012. And 2012, still, even in that business, it took 3 or 4 new business concepts. This wasn't like, people talk about pivots. Pivots are, you're kind of still in the same, but you're changing models. Like these were like scrap, restart, scrap, restart. And by the end of it, it was just like, I think the big insight was we are trying to build too many ideas that we are not the customer of. Right. And I think that was the big insight that I had at the beginning.
Where were they coming from? It's just kind of like, oh, what about this? Like you're kind of imagining a need or like extrapolating a need from not having firsthand experience or something like that?
Yeah, I saw cool ideas. So on the internet, like when you're first getting introduced to the internet and you're sort of seeing everything come at you, like you have TechCrunch, Mashable, Twitter, and all these awesome ideas. And I started thinking, that's a cool idea. I think there's a derivative off of that could be even more interesting. But I wasn't necessarily the customer of some of those. And then there was pressure inside of that system to create a company because now you have raised money for a company. I think that was the other challenge. And I'll speak a bit actually how the opposite of that I think is super important to the start of Unsplash. So yeah, 2012, we cycled through those ideas and eventually just scrapped it all. And we had maybe 3 months worth left of money. And we said, we have to build something that we are interested in because we're never gonna, we would use ourselves. Otherwise, we're never gonna just make something exceptional. Yeah. And I went back to my agency days and I just thought there was so much in the way of creative work. What if we could remove that? You've got accounting, you've got legal, sales, finance, and all this like overhead. What if we could just automate that and connect great people, great quality freelancers, independent talent with high quality projects? And so that was that initial concept. Okay. We didn't build anything crazy. We just started manually doing it. So we would try to find like designers, we'd write to them manually, get enough that we thought where we could attract enough projects. The project part was really hard, like trying to figure out how to get those projects going. Because of the previous companies, we had built up, a bit of a following there. So we were able to share that. That kind of ran out though within a month. That's where the ideas started to really flow in the sense of like, we're going to die kind of ideas. So we need to figure out something. No money, not enough money to do ads, anything in traditional. And I think that was the next ethos that still sticks with us today. That's where Unsplash came from. So we said, we need to figure out a unique way to grow that can repeat over and over and over again without us spending pretty much any time on it because we're building this other business.
Right.
And the ideas where we're on the phone with these potential customers a lot, talking to them. They're telling us these problems. They're asking us all these questions before they hire a designer. What if we solved all those micro problems before the problem of hiring the designer? If we can do that for them, then we sort of become the onboarding eventually when they are going to decide to hire a designer.
Right.
That was running through our head. And this opportunity came up where we were making that first version of our website. We shot photos for it. And I thought back again as a designer, it's like, I never really know if I can use this image for free.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
the copyright with it? Like, I'm designing with it. I don't know. And then I'm like, what if we just made the thing that was really easy that we would want? You know, you just download and you knew you could use it for anything. And so we took the leftovers from that photo shoot, put them on a Tumblr blog, uh, registered the domain. This was in a 3-hour afternoon, $38. It looked super embarrassing. It was 10 images every 10 days. We just put them up there, put it on Hacker News because I'm like, let's put it in a spot where stuff gets shit on anyway. So we'll put it over there, and if it gets shit on, it'll just disappear.
Yeah.
Didn't look at it at all. Got a text message from the photographer we were working with, and he said, "Hey man, where'd you put that site? Because my portfolio is blowing up right now." I only put it on Hacker News, so went back there and it was number one. I think it was most commented of one of the top 10 most commented posts of that year. It ended up being
Wow. And
30,000.
was it a brand new concept then, or were there other players in the space?
So there was like Flickr, and you could go deep, Creative Commons, like go through all the filtering and the searches to try to find something.
Bizarre, yeah.
That was kind of it. And you could try to go through weird sites, like search it and try to find someone who had a free like part of their portfolio, like 10 images. It was all kind of in that way.
But everything else was monetized on the front end, right? If you want to use this, choose the size and buy the license. Even that process is insane, even if you have the money to do it.
Yeah, it's like drop downs on drop downs. You just keep going, and it's like, you want this license with this license. How many people you sell? I have no idea.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was just a big problem, and that was, I think, what made Unsplash hit, in the sense that it was an even bigger problem than I thought.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be useful for maybe 1,000 web designers, maybe 100 web designers. That's why we made it the way we did. Like a Tumblr blog is not supposed to support 30,000 image downloads on the first day.
Badass. Yeah, carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's good. So that's, I think, was a big turning point moment. You learn through that. Now you have enough experiences layered under this where you start to learn what it really means when people want something. Like Unsplash, we could have stopped doing any work. We basically did no work. We would go in every 10 days and see the images that were up and put 10 images into and send a newsletter. And I would come back 10 days later and it would grow by 30%. You know, and to me, you're just seeing this. And then at the same time, you have another company next to it. So you're fortunate in a way where you're like almost A/B testing companies.
Yeah, yeah.
At the same time, same stage, roughly, you're able to see, wow, there's a real need. We really struck on a chord here. So we reached this moment where Unsplash was just the number one referral source for that business. We eventually grew in 2 years, grew to about $25 million in project value that was running through it. All freelancers, independent contracts, were connecting them to projects. Unsplash was then at another level. In that 1 to 2 year span, it grew 32x. It was like insane. And we moved it off onto its own site just to keep up with being able to serve the images. And then there was actual costs that came with it. So we had to make a decision at that point. We've got 2 companies, but we have only capital really for one of them. Mm-hmm. So that's when we decided to sell Crew, and we sold Crew to Dribble, the design community. Awesome. And the remaining capital we put towards Unsplash because it didn't have a business model yet.
So and in terms of the division of labor between those 2 companies, Crew was obviously way over indexed on how much time and energy and money you're putting in.
Yeah. Like we were a 30-person team and Unsplash was a 0-person team. Like comparative hours per week, 1/60th of a 1 person. And then this one is 40, times 40.
Yeah, so it's an incredible lesson, I think, that you have that validation from an absolute fraction of the effort. You're able to validate an idea that you can abandon a $25 million business to go and build that because you see the upside and the potential. And you mentioned before you thought there was like 1,000 people that would get a use out of this thing. what became more obvious with time that the use case was expanding beyond your original idea?
We started to see them. I would just browse the internet and see them in blog posts, or like we'd be at some event for startup companies and they'd be in the pitch decks. My parents my mom had just retired and she was taking like a writing class and the writer told them to use Unsplash and she sends
Wow,
me
that's
that,
cool.
it's like these moments. Yeah, it's another level when it starts to hit like the parents.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it's like such a viral product because when I was in, I don't know, 2015, it must have been at an agency I was at. It's like if one person at the agency uses Unsplash, it's like everybody knows about it. And it was literally the only solution. It's not like you're shopping around. So it feels like you guys had that just massive market expansion. It just grew virally for a couple of years while everybody else was kind of looking in the other direction. You talk about like the competition as it existed at the time and how that's changed or tried to kind of model what you're doing.
Yeah, eventually we learned that there was some other free sites that we hadn't really like come across because they just didn't feel good or look good to what we wanted to use. Uh, and then also one of the challenges, because we weren't fully focused on Unsplash, there was a bunch of copycats that came up. And because we had an open license, like it's Creative Commons 0, you could use it for anything. People would literally just scrape the entire thing and then do better SEO than us.
Yeah.
And so those are some things, and we thought like it's still net positive, like everything's good.
Right.
But then what happened is some of those sites like would refuse to take images down, and everything would come back to us. So it's like the original contribution happened on Unsplash, and like, hey, this thing has this up, and they're doing some weird stuff with my image, and I can't take it down. That's like all the stuff was flowing back to Unsplash.
Right.
So that's when we made a slight change to the license to protect Unsplash, but also protect the contributors. So it's still a super open license. You can do for whatever you want, personally and commercially, but you can't come in en masse download the entire thing and go create like an exact replica. Like
Right.
that's not in the spirit of what we're trying to create.
And at this point in time, like when your mom is discovering this thing, when is this point in time?
She, I think about 2 years in. So 2015 was the first time that they started hearing about it. And then, yeah, noting on the competition too, we started to see the big incumbents like Adobe. I think they did 7 images every 7 days. That became a thing. Like everybody was doing,
Right.
Getty was doing a thing. Shutterstock was doing a thing.
They're
So
just mimicking the tactic, but they kept the rest of the business model exactly the same.
yeah,
And when did you pivot from delivering in batches to just indexing images on the site?
that took us 2 years. So the first year, it was 10 images every 10 days. People would submit, we'd go through the submissions and put up the next 10 and just kept going. We reached, the 360 and then 720. And once it got sort of that long, like it was an endless scroll thing, and there was no search. That's a little too long, right? People, you want to find stuff now. The library's a bit bigger than that. That was part of the piece of moving it onto its own thing so we could build a proper way to search. But yeah, it was about 2 years in. And I think that while that took us longer and we probably could have done that sooner, I think there was some benefits actually to the constraints that we created. So the 10 every 10 days, first, it was a reason for people to come back. It solved a potential, like, we don't know where we're going to get these images from. Like at the beginning, we wanted to source these because there was just they weren't existing anywhere. So we needed to start from scratch. And we did the first 10 and we thought, hey, we could keep up with 10 every 10 days if we needed to. So that's usually one of the challenges of like a marketplace model on the internet. There's 2 sides to it and you're trying to solve both at the same time. It's like a chicken and egg. By solving one of them, by you being one side of it, you can control that whole side and then you don't have to deal with it, right? Like you can fuel that side yourself and then just work on letting the demand come. Fortunately, there was enough people to submit.
Right. I was just going to go into that side. Like the incentive on the creative side is you're going to get your work delivered to X thousand of inboxes every week. And as a creative, I would be the first one with my hand up, like, yeah, put it in there as long as my name's on it. That's great.
I think even the first ones were like, it was just to be a part of a shared thing that we're going to create for the creative community. We didn't have stats, profiles, anything.
People just giving them
Uh,
to you.
yeah, and I think there was just a power of, you're contributing to the community. We picked 10. So also there was it created a bit of accidentally aspiration. Like, can I submit one of the best 10 to get in the email? And then we would feature it prominently. Like, there was only a couple words in that email. It's like, here's the 10 every 10, and it's like download and the person's name. So and we push out to their portfolio. So we would do that anyway, even though they didn't ask for it.
And the growth of the product, how did the size of the team change or the way you structured the team change as the product grew? So you go from this thing that's being distributed in an email newsletter to building out like an indexable, presumably like image tags and all of this search infrastructure. It got like an order of magnitude more complicated over the course of a few years, right?
Yeah. And one of the lessons we did learn, like, Crew was our first company. Like, this is all our first company, and my co-founders, all of our first companies too. We learned something about scaling a bit too fast, and it still sticks with us today, where when in doubt, do things in sequence rather than in parallel. Usually one of the flaws of companies is they try to do too many things in parallel. They just run, hey, we raise a bunch of money, let's hire a bunch of people, and there's this big growth opportunity, let's just layer that on top. And then what happens is like 100x the commitments that you originally thought. It's 100x the costs. It affects your underlying thing that was working in ways that you didn't really expect. And so we were very aware of that experience from our previous business. So with Unsplash, we were laying it on top of each other in that methodical kind of, like, you were building a new city. It's like we were very methodical, going from infrastructure layer up. So even when we built it and took it on its own site, there was just one person. It was my co-founder, Luke. And basically we never scaled anything until that person broke. So literally that person, like, Luke would be like, all right, I can't do the submissions anymore. Yeah, I'm about to break. We need some help. And if we couldn't build a technical system to it, that's when we would hire. So even when we spun out and had people full-time on it for the first time in 2017, it started just with 4 people.
Yeah, and the like exponential scale of it, even from like a hosting cost perspective, is kind of that same idea that you noticed early in your career, like the leverage you can create with code must have been just like the amount of people you're serving as a team of 4 is kind of bonkers based on like the size this thing got so quickly.
Yeah, at year 5, we were per engineer, so users per engineer, we were doing more than Facebook comparably at their year 5. And even today, we're 23 people.
It's incredible, yeah. And you're gonna do a billion image downloads this year, correct?
Yeah.
It's a hefty AWS bill, right?
Yeah. It's funny how those things scale though too. They have leverage baked into them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
as you reach different tiers, it levels off a bit. So it's not as bad.
I got one note here I wanted to ask you about. So when we were like preparing for this, and I was planning on doing this on the iPad, but for some reason my Wi-Fi's gone crazy today. But the idea of like we talked about yesterday, the idea quality and execution quality kind of ratcheting up together, and you getting to this inflection point. And I think that is the point on the graph that I was trying to annotate earlier, where you really, these two things meet, and your ideas, the quality of your ideas and the quality of your execution just lock into place, and then you're off to the races. I love some of your observations about, not scaling the team until somebody can't perform the function anymore, and this idea of structured progress and like linear, like let's add this, build it, finish it, and then let's add the next thing. How else do you think about, because there's obviously 1,000 directions you can go in. How do you like stay on the path that you're on, or like evaluate what to do next versus like, that sounds cool, but we're not going to do that right now?
Yeah, I think that's another when in doubt. So like when in doubt, do less sort of thing. That has been another one. So if you're looking at a potential idea, looking at it, and it's hard because you come from optimism, right? So if you're
Mhm.
starting something from scratch, you have an optimistic view of the world because the odds are against you. So that means you have to be an optimist. And when you come up with these ideas later after something has hit, you usually meet them with that same level of optimism. So what I've intentionally done is still like be positive about it. But when you noodle, when you think, the default is we're not quite sure how it's going to be. Let's just do it. The default more becomes let's table it, think about it more, keep focusing on what we have until it becomes a bit more clear before you decide to invest your time and energy on it. Because yeah, it's really, if you're building the right things and you were just mentioning linear, your team may not need to even grow at all. So like we've been 23 people for 2 years, but that the growth that we have is exponential. And that just totally speaks to if the right things are being built, then you don't need to be jumping on something else because every piece of code you write, even though the time spent per each item of code is the same, the the increase in inflection that you're getting, they just keep layering on top of each other.
And I think there's something about this is not unique to the Unsplash model, but it's definitely a luxury that only a few businesses earn, is that you have this core functionality and then the flywheel is user generated, or there's some component that is growing the quality of the product without you needing to scale your team to make that happen. So that's
Right.
another beautiful piece of this model, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel, if I were to start another company again, I would spend so much energy finding the thing that resonates with people like automatically. Like you don't, you just feel it. You can feel it pulling. If you were to go to bed, people are still going to pull it for you, that sort of feeling. And until you really have that, because sometimes you go a little quick, you think you have it. And that's what I've done a few times in those early 4 or 5 year starts. And you can create it even. You can create it a bit yourself and you'll feel it. You'll drink your own Kool-Aid. But at a certain point, you break because it doesn't have its own pull. Like you were the one
You
creating the
have to
pull.
like roll it every day.
Yeah.
That's
And
fascinating.
then when you do that enough, when you just keep trying to come up with and I think that's what we were speaking about, the idea and execution through all these things, when you keep just trying to do things, those are getting honed along the entire way. Like your taste in ideas and your taste in execution, like what you choose to do, the ideas you choose to execute on, they keep getting better and better. So you just keep showing up. And it's almost like the luck is going to happen because you're just there for so long doing it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things to hear, especially if you're like pre finding the thing that people pull at. So
Yeah.
I've had a very similar experience where it's like, I've seen an opportunity in the market for something that's being done poorly that I can do well, but it doesn't have this like magnetism to it. Like I still have to like pound the pavement and be like, can I convince you that this is the thing that you need? Like,
Yeah.
and that like when that inverse happens, yeah, it's like, why would you focus on anything but that? Finding that is, you're finding it even before you found it, in a sense. Like the skill set you're developing by doing things wrong is getting you there, and I think that's an important thing to remember if you're not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. The underlying, I've always had this thought where it's stay very close to people who have good taste and an insane rate of learning. they'll eventually hit on something.
Eventually figure it out.
I've seen it, I've been now around people making stuff for 11 years. And every time I've felt that, those two things about somebody, they hit at some point.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Someone asked for what that quote was. Stay near to people who have great taste and an insane rate of learning. We got some people taking notes. And by the way, if anyone's got questions, whack them in the box. I think in 5 minutes or so, we'll get around to them. So I think the last part of the story is, a lot of people are curious about the monetization model of Unsplash as well, because we didn't get into the transition from the sale to Dribble to Unsplash, but it's a venture-backed business, Unsplash, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a venture-backed business. It's the same investors from the previous company. So everybody who had their ownership in Crew, same people who have same ownership in Unsplash. And then over time, it's just how you think about the company. Like I think differently about venture capital now than I did in 2013. At that time, there was mantras going around that it was like the be all end all, like you need to be venture backed, otherwise you're not like a real business.
Right.
That is obviously not true at all, and the pendulum has really swung the other way right now. And my feeling around all of it is it's more a tool that you can potentially use as long as you really understand the ins and outs of what the contracts are, how it works, the incentives, the incentive alignment that the investors have. So by raising, I think we've done 5 rounds. I've done 5 rounds total, raised about $20 million over all this time period. I've learned a lot about all of that. So I know much more now, like if we raise money, I know exactly sort of what we need to do to structure it, how much we should raise, how to think about it, so that it aligns with what we want to be doing.
Yeah, and I think it's vastly dependent on the business itself, right?
Yeah.
The winner take all business is a much better candidate for venture capital than the couple $1 million a year tech product that's a small team of people. I think that's like a sticking point for a lot of people. It's like, I must raise money, but in some cases, if you have this product that you can grow at such a ridiculous scale because you have that pull, but if you were to monetize it directly, you would probably slow down the growth, right? So it's like this weird balancing act in the early days based on the virality of the product and the scale you think you can get it to in the long term. I think Unsplash probably a perfect example of like a candidate for venture capital for that reason.
Yeah, that was one of the first things we thought about when we spun Unsplash out, and before we spun Unsplash out was, do we need venture capital? What is it like? And that depends on the business model that we want to build. So everything was free, and we looked at what, there's licensing that exists around imagery, but we just don't think that that's the model of the future at all, where it's going. Everyone's got a professional level camera in their pocket, and the way creating is being done it's totally different. It's not like you have these art and creative departments and you send everything to them and they do it all. Everyone's doing their own stuff. We've got great tools now, and they're just getting better and better. So that has all completely changed. And when we looked at ways to monetize, we felt there was just a much better opportunity to just change it. Like, it can't be licensing. That's not the future. And we felt you should be pairing your business model to the thing that is your differentiation. Our differentiation was that we can get more people to a single image than any other platform. And we can get that image anywhere on the internet, not just in one centralized place. So our view was, you fill in the blank on that. What we can do for an image, we can do for any brand.
Yep.
And that's where the idea for the ad model came from, where we work with brands and they pay to post their visuals and rank them on searches that matter to them. It works, and we thought through all sort of the mechanics of how it would affect the product. It actually helps the product because in some cases the searches, they don't have enough, or we're missing visuals. And a lot of these brands have great stuff. We had motorcycle images from Harley.
Right.
And we've got new Microsoft images where from their new computing stuff. Dell is doing stuff with their gaming. We didn't have any gaming stuff. So it's really interesting to see that all fit together. To usually ad models, they're against the platform, right? They hurt it. They sort of pull it down. It's like a necessary evil. And what I like about Unsplash is it fits. It fits really well with that. It fits with the unique thing that we can do. And it's a very strong business model if you can get it going. The challenge with ad business models are usually, can you get it going against like the behemoths of Google and Facebook?
Yeah, and it's like you say, the polar opposite. And the incentives, there's like a flywheel of incentives that exist there between you, the brands, and the creators themselves, which is super cool. All right, we got a couple questions. There's a Q&A box on this one, so if you have a question, stick it in the Q&A box. I've read a little bit about how you encouraged user-generated content in the early days of Unsplash. Can you talk about specific techniques you used to get people to start posting content in the extreme early days? I think you touched on that a little bit. When you had less than 1,000 users, there was a little bit of momentum just as a function of the excitement around the product. Is that right?
Yeah, the key in the beginning was the constraint that we created, the 10 images every 10 days. So that was powerful. That created enough of a psychological powerful effect that caused people to submit. So we didn't have to write to anybody. We weren't writing to people saying, submit your images, that sort of thing. By constraining it, it also just lowered the bar. Like, you don't need to say, we need to go get 1,000 images, and then you start like suffering on quality. So I found that to be so powerful in so many ways. Like those early constraints, every single time with a product, I would look to find something that is a constraint that fits with it, that also sort of lowers the bar. It doesn't require you to make these judgment calls, which might totally screw up, what you're trying to create. So it might be small, but it's like small and mighty. You've got 10 images, great, and you feel great because you're fulfilled, you're above and beyond fulfilling what people are looking for. Once in a while you could drop 20, they're gonna be blown away. But if you were sitting there saying, this is the source, like today we've got, this is the source for visuals, people are gonna expect way more than 10 images every 10 days.
Yeah. No, that's a great insight. I think the temptation to overextend yourself, especially when you have something that resonates. And I think another thing is not getting bored of your own idea is a really powerful reminder. I've just looked back in hindsight on things that I've seen friends of mine work on, and it's like you had traction, but you got bored before like you had the volume of interest required to turn it into a sustainable business. So it's fascinating to hear that happen at all different scales.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like 99% of people won't do the dirty work, but also 99% of people won't stick with their ideas. Like they won't go past 2-3 years. Like you look at the average time frames of tech companies, it's that.
Yeah.
Just by the function of you being around longer than that, like put your time frame longer, make it 10, make it 20, 25. Now you're just you're competing on a different time frame, which puts you already in 1%. You could be building anything, but your time frame is just completely different for how you think about it versus other people.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that knocks people out of the game now faster is, Unsplash got 1 billion downloads. Like you're so focused on the end metric and so oblivious to the story that drove that end result, that end metric, that it's easy to kind of see that as this impossible thing to achieve. So that's one of the reasons I want to do more conversations like this. It's like, nope, everybody banged their head against the wall and they had terrible ideas and they ended up building something they had no idea they were going to build in the majority of cases.
Yeah, you can. One thing I've thought a lot about too is the internet is so great that you can be mediocre and build an amazing business.
It's true.
If you look at anything else, if you're in athletics, you have to be in the top 0.001% and let's talk about the NFL football, to make $1 million, I forget the average, it's not that high, like $1 million, 0.001%, you know, you do something on the internet, there's just so much opportunity that sits there. And I think most people, because the internet actually tries to pull you away from spending time on that one idea a lot.
Yes, it's true.
So it's, can you fight those opposite forces of the place where you need to be?
Yeah.
Like, it's this weird
Yeah, it's
dichotomy.
fascinating. It's like the algorithm, that your ability to defend yourself against the algorithm that's trying to distract you and feed stuff into the algorithm that other people are gonna
Yeah.
be is going to be magnetic to other people. Stephen asked a question about the process for refining an idea. So let's say in the context of like launching a feature for Unsplash, how do you make decisions around what's worth pursuing, and then how do you test the success of something?
Yeah. So there's an initial intuition with it where it's, and this all comes back to that original point where if you're building something that you use yourself, these decisions become much easier. So I can really only speak to that experience. When we think about, and we're thinking about a feature right now, I think first, would I use it, and why would I use it? How would I use it? And that's it. So like, that's really the inputs that go into it. That's the first piece. So we're already thinking about what the person is going to see as an end result. I do not care how we're going to get there yet. Like,
Right.
how are we going to get the images that are going to go in it?
Right.
What data do we need? You know, what resources? I think it's very powerful to start with the end state that you want and work your way backwards and try to get as close to that end state as possible once you pull everything into it. And then the next sort of mental model in my head is to simplify it, and those same parameters of the early Unsplash. Like, what would make people come back regularly? Like, what sort of a cadence? What's a low bar number? You know, something easy that we could do in the beginning that would validate, and something that we could scale on top of, and something will allow us to ship maybe in one week or 2 weeks. So that's really the two pieces. But I think really starting with the end is the
That's
key.
great. I think a lot of this stuff is just so simple. We can't grasp that the insight could be that direct and that simple. Like, if you're not building something that you're going to use, or you would use, or a past version of yourself would use, you have no ability to validate whether or not it's worth doing, right? So you're already like, the odds are so long based on the fact that you have not been in that situation and unable to
Yeah.
validate it in the same way. And I'm kind of in the same, I've been caught in that loop way behind that, where you're just, I think I know what this person thinks, and you rarely ever do unless it's you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
And to make something exponentially better, you need to exponentially experience those problems. Like, if
Yeah.
you're not in it, the nastiness, like, you got this mic, you know, you're in it. Like, you're recording your hours on this. Like, I got to find this. I know the solution. It needs to have this, this, and this, and this. You know, you're probably the person who could create a mic if you needed to. You know, not someone who thinks the mic is a great opportunity
Mm-hmm.
and is looking at it from that direction.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think we look past our own experience sometimes and think that opportunity always exists outside of that. So I think I hope everybody listening to this gets a ton of value from that, because everything that I've ever done that's gotten even a tiny bit of traction has been like, oh, I wish I had that a couple
Yeah.
of years ago. It
Yeah.
seems obvious in hindsight. What else did we get? We got a question on the future of advertising. We're past it in the chat, but I'm going to just throw that out there as the future of advertising for you to pontificate on.
Well, Jack and I have had a lot of conversations about this. Actually, he's helped distill some of these thoughts that we've been having about what not only our product is, but I think what the big problem with advertising is that it just interrupts you right now. Like, it's not additive at all. It just takes value away. I always talk about this example where I'm feeding my daughter and she has like the tiniest attention span. She's going to flip out and I get an ad for 10 seconds for Swiffer. How do I feel about Swiffer in that moment? I know they're registering an impression and everyone's, the media agency's making money and the marketing department's saying it's working. People are watching this. I'm pissed though.
Yeah.
You're not evaluating how I feel about that impression. And it's like not all impressions are created equal. And we've talked about a concept of it's not impression, it's impressed.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big differences of Unsplash. It's even the difference of people who make quality ads. Like an ad, if you like it and it's good, sometimes you see that with like 10 million, 15 million views on a good ad on YouTube because it's actually a good story and it's a product and it's entertaining in itself. So, but I think the big problem is the interruptive piece. We're not asking for advertisements today. We get chased around. We're annoyed. It gets in our way. You can't do anything on your mobile phone looking at websites. And I think the future is just pushing back completely on that. We already are automatically doing that. So we're ignoring stuff. Even if we don't have ad blockers, our brains have basically created ad blockers.
Yeah.
We know what to ignore. And that's, I think, a very powerful thing for the future of what this could be. You need to just think totally different. I do not think the future of advertising is likely to be built by somebody who comes from advertising, because you think that advertising has to be like that.
Right.
And this is a whole other space for us too. We were involved in disrupting image and visual assets. Now we're involved in disrupting advertising. And I like our odds because we're just coming at it completely differently. And I think all of the tailwinds of what is going to happen on the internet, the ad blockers, people ignoring stuff, wanting things that they want, not getting in the way of them, all works in the favor of a model from like Unsplash.
Yeah, I think your observation there is like, this is going to be a cultural change as a result of like a set of behaviors and a set of platforms like Unsplash that just like ultimately people vote for with their attention at the end of the day, right? It's like this thing starts to overtake in terms of results, and that becomes about, hey, respect where I'm trying to go and what I'm trying to look at and what I'm here for. Like, make my experience better and I will reward you over the long term. It makes total sense, but you have to have patience to win that game. Ali asked a question about, do you have any other notable mistakes to avoid? You mentioned not building in parallel and not hiring past the needs of the team in any given moment. Anything else come to mind around things that you would have done differently in hindsight?
Yeah, I mean, hiring people is going to be, it's a big challenge, but it's like just a huge point of leverage. It's eventually, if you start to build something at scale, if you want to be doing something like that, you're going to have some semblance of a team. So understanding how to hire, that's like a whole other game, and like, it's weird sometimes when you come from the background of being a creator, like you're the maker, and then all of a sudden you shift to evaluating people, which is like just a totally different bucket of expertise. Right. And everybody learns in different ways. Where I've come out, I've probably interviewed upwards of 250 people by now over this time. And where I'm at now is, there's a couple things in these meetings. Like in 30 minutes, there's a few things that people are going to say that you're going to be like, that was, if you pick up on these little things, they actually mean big things. And it's not really, people will answer your questions and they'll usually be good answers, but there's going to be maybe little things here and there that they say. And one of them, for example, that I pick out a lot is when someone says, to be honest, blah, 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 blah. What that says to me is sometimes you're not honest then. So sometimes, does this fit with our, like, we don't want someone who feels that they can't be transparent, but only in an especially circumstanced way that they, in that moment, they can say, yeah, I can be honest. I'll let me be honest. So I look for little things like that. I look for, if we were hiring a salesperson, when we set up a video call and some of them come on their phone, and I'm like, if I'm a salesperson, you know that speaking and seeing people's faces is
Right.
an important thing. That's usually enough of a signal like that you're not trying to put all the odds in your favor as a salesperson. So I've learned to over-index a lot on those little things, because I've got a lot
Right.
on people who answer the harder things well.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. You could definitely write a little book on those things. Have a little list running on that, because that's fascinating.
We have one post somewhere that's why I didn't look at your resume, that has about 20 of them.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Every like recent conversation we've had on these office hours, there has been like an incredible hiring insight on from each conversation. And normally, you know, people coming from very similar position where it's like, you've not existed in this corporate hierarchy. You haven't like learned how to check boxes or anything like that. You've just gone through this process dozens of times, and you've just picked up on these little things that were consistent with the people who were great and consistent with the people who were not great. Pretty awesome. We got another question. Mindset and psychology during the years of failed experiments. What was kind of driving you to keep going throughout that?
Freedom. So what I started this whole thing, the first book I read was a 4-Hour Work Week. And I remember thinking the only way that something like that is possible, the ability to feel like you're only working 4 hours. You're doing other things. You're spending your hours doing things that you like, and only 4 of it is actual work, like administrative tasks. And I felt the only way to really do that is to build something online, build something on the internet. And that was a driving factor, was really lifestyle design. And like, I want to make something that essentially can set me free, can set anyone I'm with free, can set others free. And ultimately, I think that that's what we're all after as a first stage. It's like, you want to be free, and part of being free is like financially free. You solve a lot of those problems, you start to move up in how you can think about things and what you can think about. And I just want more people to be in that spot. I think it's a great spot for us to make progress all together.
Agreed. That's a great answer. 3 other co-founders, right?
3, yeah.
How Dario asked a question. How do you settle disagreements, or have you guys always been in lockstep on like the vision of the product, or how have you kind of kept that running with 4 people at the helm?
I've actually found over time we've gotten more challenging, which I like. Like, we challenge each other more. And I think it's because we've all grown into our own, and we bring now different perspectives because we just work on totally different areas of the company. So no, I would say even today we agree less than we did, for the first 5 years, but the outputs are way better. And everything through this whole time that we've been building all this stuff together, it has always been about the best idea. Like, I do not care about being right. There's no ego. I just want the best idea. And usually my first question will be, even if you might think someone's perspective is completely wrong, I respect my co-founders so much, and I have a process in my head automatically where when they say something that's the opposite of what I think would be correct in the situation, I say, I actually genuinely think, what is it that you think is correct or that I think is wrong, but not in a negative tone sort of way. I'm genuinely curious, trying to understand that point, because I just want us to be the best answer and right.
Have you always been like that, or do you teach yourself that?
I've been that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Sense.
We never have well, I'm the CEO, that's how it's going to go.
Right.
That's shitty rationale. That's like your parents telling you, I can't go outside. Why? Because.
Yeah. That's great, man. I mean, it's reflected in the quality of the product. So props. What's your favorite coffee shop in Montreal?
I think someone's teeing this up. We started a coffee shop.
Yeah,
Our
there you go.
first office for crew, yeah.
Nice. What, as part of the brand or?
Yeah, it's I imagined, so we never had an office space. Everything was remote. We were working digitally. And we wanted us like a second space that you could sort of have. And we thought, what would be the physical version of crew? And it's like, well, it should be us working amongst freelancers, working amongst creators. They should have access to our office because that's what our site is. We both work on it. Right? Like we make the site, but they're the ones who make the site.
Right.
Without the creators, without the freelancers and good talent, it doesn't matter. We have bits of code, that can't make the actual product. So that's what we did. We had an office in the back and then full on cafe in the front. People could access private workspaces. It was an old bank. So you can imagine it was a 1920s bank. It was the Royal Bank of Canada. So everything was like gold plated. It was ridiculous. And it ceilings were like the size of, it's like an Apple store. Like if you imagine the vibe, like 50-foot ceilings. It's a really good spot for people to work, and we could fit tons of people per day. We did more coffee than all the coffee shops in Montreal.
Well, apparently that wasn't a tee up because we had a very surprised reaction. Crew Collective. Is it Crew Collective, the name of the shop?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, what are we on? We're on 6 o'clock here, Mikael. This has been quite the conversation. Thank you for taking the time, mate. And where can we get in touch with you? It's Mikael Cho at just
Twitter.
Mikael Cho, right?
At Mikael Cho, yeah.
Fantastic. And another request for a crew collective in Seattle too. So maybe, if the image thing doesn't work out, mate, you can get into the coffee game.
Man.
All right, mate. Well, absolute pleasure. I will chat to you soon. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in wherever you are. Much appreciated. And make sure you keep up with Mikael on the Twitters. I'll catch you in a bit, mate. Nice one.
Thanks, Jeff. Talk to you later.